Say what you will about the differences in ideologies behind open source and free software. They are very, very different movements, but I can completely respect supporters of both of these movements, because even though they are very different movements with very different goals, they do have some overlap, but still fundamentally different. Licenses under both of these banners apply equally to all parties involved. Yes, a permissive license allows a company to come along, yoink the project, make it proprietary, and make it theirs. But that applies to everybody. You can do the exact same thing. And yes, a copyleft license stops people adding additional restrictions to the code, but that applies to everyone, the developers, and also you. However, sometimes the terms of the license are not good enough for certain projects, so in comes what is referred to as a contributor license agreement, often just referred to as its acronym CLA. Now, oftentimes when the term CLA is used, it is used in a very negative light. And I understand why, because oftentimes that you hear about them, they are a very negative document that are trying to destroy developer rights, they're trying to supersede the license, and do other things which, frankly, should not be there in a free software or an open source project. But like many things out there, a CLA is only as bad as the terms of the document. There are cases where CLA are not as bad, there are cases where CLA are good. And then there are cases where they absolutely suck and you should run the other way. But in short, a CLA is an additional document that often you are required to sign, not always, there are some very key exceptions, before you're allowed to contribute to the project. So here are a couple of examples. Prior to 2011, all Fedora contributors were required to sign the Fedora project Individual Contributor License Agreement. This was then superseded by the Fedora Project Contributor Agreement, with the earlier document being based on Apache's Individual Contributor License Agreement. As of 2008, the KDE project makes use of the Fiduciary Licensing Agreement made by the FSFE. Now, this is one of those cases where it is optional. Most people have not signed it. There are a lot of people that have, but you do not have to sign this document. Now, arguably, things like the FSF's copyright assignment are a form of CLA. And whilst it was made as kind of a anti-CLA, depending on who you ask, the Developer Certificate of Origin from the Linux Foundation used in the Linux kernel is also a kind of CLA. But when people use the term Contributor License Agreement CLA, what they are often referring to are things like what Discourse has, where you are basically signing away all of your developer rights. Now, all of these documents are very, very, very different. There is no one set thing, this is a CLA. Let's take, for example, the Fedora Project Contributor Agreement. This document does not assign your copyright to the Fedora project. What it does is provides them with a license to make use of your code. It does not allow them to relicense the code outside of the terms of the license you already have. So if you have code that is licensed under a GPL license, it can be licensed under the terms of the GPL license. If it's MIT, that is a more permissive license, and it can be relicensed in a more permissive way, but it doesn't give them any additional rights, unless we are talking about unlicensed code. In the case of code that does not have a license, they can provide a default license, and this license can be changed. In short, you're saying, I wrote this code, you're allowed to use the code, and you have to follow the terms of my license, and if I don't provide a license, then you can license the code in a way you see fit. Let's go and look at the KDE Fiduciary License Agreement. Now, this one might seem intimidating because it is 4 pages long. One of those pages is just your information, and the first page and most of the second page is just definitions. So the FSFE made this document to deal with the issues with full copyright assignment. So with the FSF, for example, you assign your copyright to the FSF. Basically, they own your code now, And this, in the case of the FSF, is done for good reason. If they need to go and protect that code in court, if they own the code, this is much easier to do. And generally, you're going to trust that the FSF is going to try to keep that code as free software and isn't going to relicense it in a way that is now completely against the terms. Many other organizations you probably wouldn't trust with that. But this comes with an issue. If the FSF is ever taken over and they decide, okay, we're just gonna go proprietary now, we don't actually care about free software anymore, they own all of the code and they can do whatever they want with it. They can relicense it, they can do anything because they own the copyright. This document is made to deal with that. So instead of doing a full copyright assignment, what you are doing is assigning the economic rights over that code to the KDE project whilst retaining the moral rights to the code, the right to be identified as the author. So they can go and operate legally on your behalf. If they ever need to go to court to go and fight some copyright troll or something like that, they can easily go and do so, but you still own the code. This also means because you are still the author, they can't go evil down the line and then relicense all of the code. Also, it is an optional document, so if for whatever reason you don't like the terms of it, you don't have to sign this one. Now, as for the developer certificate of origin, as I said, this is so light, this is so simple, this is the entire document, it hasn't half loaded, there isn't a longer version of it, this is everything, it is so basic, it is often described as the anti-CLA because it doesn't provide any additional rights. Basically, all it is saying is you own the code and it has a suitable open source license, and to the best of your knowledge, it is based upon works that you have the right to see, you have the right to use. So it's a fork of some open source project under a compatible license. It's not based on leaked code from a code base you shouldn't be seeing. You're allowed to use the code, and the contribution is being provided by you or on behalf of somebody else who wants the code to be contributed. That's all. No additional rights. It is basically just saying, we have the right to use the code, you have the right to use the code, we agree on this. It's pretty much to say, if somebody does contribute code that maybe wasn't allowed to be in there, maybe they intentionally did so, it is a very easy way to say, okay, you agreed to these terms, don't do this again, and if it is malicious, get out of here. Now, in the past few years, whilst there has been some disagreement about the Fedora project's contributor agreement, about whether it's doing too much, whether the automatic licensing of unlicensed code should really be done, whether that really makes sense, for the most part, all of these documents are considered at least neutral, if not positive. Even the case of the FSF's copyright assignment, specifically because it's being done with the FSF. If you're doing a copyright assignment to, say, Microsoft, you might have a very different opinion. And that's where things like the Discourse CLA come in, because the Discourse CLA is why people have an instant negative reaction to when they hear the term CLA. If you ever see this phrasing right here, you grant to the company, this being Discourse in this case, a non-exclusive, irrevocable, worldwide, royalty-free, sub-licensable, re-licensable, that's the big one, transferable license under all of your relevant intellectual property rights to use, copy, prepare derivative works of, distribute, and publicly perform and display the contributions on any licensing terms, including without limitation, A, open source licenses like the GNU GPL v2, and B, proprietary or commercial licenses, except for the licenses granted herein, you reserve all right, title, and interest in and to the contributions. This right here is the big problem. Re-licensable, because what you are saying here is, I don't actually care about the terms of the license. If the company does not like the license and they want to go and change it to something that's more suitable, maybe they want to go from GPL v2 to MIT, maybe a proprietary license, you have given them the right to do so. The problem with a CLA in this case is the unbalanced rights. You can't go and relicense, but they can. When you see cases as extreme as this, I think it is fair to argue that the project you're looking at might not even be an open source project anymore. I definitely don't think it's a free software project, but there's at least an argument to be had about whether or not something like this really still qualifies as either of those categories. And I think as a general rule, because there are documents like the Discourse CLA, it makes sense to immediately have a negative reaction when you hear the term. But as we saw from things like the Fedora project, the KDE project, even in some cases the FSF or the Linux kernel, CLA isn't always an inherently bad concept. They just often get very, very misused. When you see something like Discourse, I would honestly recommend running the other way. I don't consider this a free software or open source project if you have the ability to relicense my code. Now, some people might disagree, some people might be fine with it, but what is very important is if you see a document like this, read the document and try to understand it. If you don't understand it, try to find someone else who knows what is being said, someone who's hopefully broken it down. If it's a good project, they're gonna provide an FAQ. For example, Fedora does exactly that. If they don't provide an FAQ, if they don't explain what all this means, honestly, I would trust them even less. I am not here to defend CLA. Most of them suck. This is just a fact. But sometimes you might run across something like the Developer Certificate of Origin, and it just doesn't really matter. It's completely okay. It's going to be pretty rare, but maybe it happens. Anyway, if you learnt something today, let me know down below. Have you signed a CLA? Would you ever sign a CLA? And would you be okay with some of the ones we've seen here where they don't really provide any additional rights? It's just more like filling in some of the gaps. I would love to know. So if you liked the video, go like the video. And if you really liked the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribe to the Pay linked in the description down below. That's going to be it for me, and CLA. I don't know what to do with the outro sometimes.
Something like this.